Our next speaker, who will be presenting virtually, is Jeremy Atkinson, Library Information Services Consultant from Cardiff, Wales. I must admit I have a particular fondness for Wales and consider the Welsh national anthem as one of the most beautiful in the world, especially when sung by a Welsh male choir, or better still, in Cardiff Arms Park, which I hope to visit one day. But back to business. Jeremy's presentation is entitled Envisioning Academic Library Services and Technology and Change Post-Pandemic, with a byline, Getting It Right. I don't see Jeremy already.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to have been invited to speak at the symposium. And I'm only sorry I haven't had the opportunity to visit Stellenbosch in person and sample the wines. Yesterday's session looked at various innovative technologies in libraries. Today, I'd like to reflect on technological innovations in libraries, particularly in the context of planning for services in a post-pandemic world. And in particular, I'd like to look at some of the softer issues around the management of services, innovation, and change management. I'm going to concentrate on two related strands of my recent work. Firstly, late last year, I carried out a survey of academic libraries and library managers in a number of countries, the UK, Europe, USA, and Australia, asking the librarians and managers to reflect on services they had provided during the pandemic, the innovations they had carried out, and get their views on services post-pandemic. The outcomes from the survey were written up in a book published a few months ago. I'll give details at the end. Secondly, I edited a book published last year, which included a number of case studies on the implementation of technologies in academic libraries, including library systems, open access, e-books, research data, and digitization. I then analysed these case studies and some important research papers to identify some of the key themes around successful innovation in academic libraries and the lessons learned. Firstly, looking at academic library services post-pandemic, I was very interested in the moves to e-commerce during the pandemic as consumers began shopping online in greater numbers and with greater frequency. The pandemic is thought to have speeded up the shift away from physical stores to digital shopping by 4 to 5 years. With shopping, there were obvious advantages during the pandemic of safety and availability, but other perceived advantages of online shopping for consumers, such as convenience, flexibility, and personal delivery or click and collect, will continue post-pandemic. Perceived disadvantages, such as determining quality, choosing the right product for the individual, and the loss of social aspects of in-person shopping, may result in some move back to physical shopping, but a significant permanent shift to online shopping seems inevitable. To me, there are some obvious parallels between the retail sector and academic libraries. Both have a physical presence and a growing online provision. An interesting question is whether the rapid and permanent shift to online predicted for the retail world will also apply to academic libraries. For academic libraries, will the range of online services introduced during lockdown be a permanent feature? Will additional online services be required? Will there be a move back to some of the more traditional face-to-face services? I sent out a short questionnaire with just 6 questions to selected academic librarians and library managers in several different countries in the UK, Europe, USA, and Australia. Given the relatively small sample, it wasn't possible to make any distinction between different types of academic library or sponsors from different countries, although the responses were often very similar. The first question I asked, have you delivered services differently during the pandemic, including provision of services online? Academic librarians reported a strong move to electronic services, with the service model being primarily online during the pandemic. Some library managers commented that it had accelerated the delivery of a number of online services that were already in development. Some libraries felt well positioned, having moved to online delivery before the pandemic. Others found the move to online more difficult because of the extent of electronic resources available or the nature of their existing online systems. Moving on to specific examples of how services were delivered differently during the pandemic. Many libraries either stopped or limited the purchase of print material during the pandemic. One library manager used the phrase e-first purchasing policy. This was a common approach, concentrating on making reading lists and course material available online. More e-books were required, and some libraries implemented a scan and deliver service where users requested a scan of an article or chapter, which, copyright permitting, was sent directly to their email. User access to physical collections was often not allowed during the pandemic, and many libraries set up a click and collect service with the users identifying online the books they wanted access to and then picking them up at agreed safe collection point. When libraries reopened in a limited way after lockdowns, access to study space was usually on the basis of users pre-booking study space in specified study zones via an online seat booking system. Most libraries were not able to offer a face-to-face inquiry service during the pandemic, and there was a move to a virtual support model with use of telephone support, email, and online chat. Online bookings were implemented to set up appointments with librarians in systems such as Zoom, MS Teams, and Blackboard Collaborate. During the pandemic, most libraries moved their library teaching and induction online wherever possible. This included digital skills, information literacy, and other study skills. A common approach was to have a live session with a Q&A session on a system such as MS Teams, supplemented by recorded sessions and online tutorials. There was some evidence of increased attendance at online sessions compared to pre-pandemic face-to-face sessions. The second question I asked is, do you think any of these services will be needed post-pandemic? There was a recognition from the respondents that the pandemic had brought forward some of the services they had already planned. As one respondent put it, the priority has become a digital option by default. Digital-first collection development was thought likely to become more normal in the future, including for e-textbooks and reading list and reserve material. There could be some interesting choices on which new services that have been introduced, which of these to retain, with different perspectives from users and library staff. In many institutions, click and collect services have been unexpectedly popular with users, although managers have commented on their staff-intensive nature. Users also like seat booking systems, although there could be future challenges for library staff in managing pre-booked and open study spaces together. In deciding which new services to retain, cost resources, the implications of cost and resources will be important. This was particularly true for click and collect and scan and deliver services, as well as for e-resources. Respondents saw a move to blended approaches to provide on-campus access and digital provision. This was particularly true of inquiry and support services, where both online and face-to-face will be retained, but with the focus shifting to more remote delivery. This was also true of online teaching and training by library staff, with online services thought to offer advantages of inclusivity, flexibility, and interaction. But some moved back to face-to-face. Face-to-face was seen likely where there were advantages for both users and librarians. The third question I asked was, in the future, which of your pre-pandemic services do you think you will need to be revised or deleted? There had been commonly a move to home working during the pandemic. There was a recognition in the future that there was a need to provide more flexible ways for library staff to work. Parallel to that, as a result of more digital options for services being made available during the pandemic, the respondents had a recognition that there would need to be a demand for greater flexibility from library users in how they access services, where from and how, digital, face-to-face, etc. Some library managers recognise that there's a need to address the value for money of some pre-pandemic operations, in particular in relation to print collections. One quote from a library manager: "The management of barely used print collections will need to be considered. We know that pre-pandemic that too much time was spent on low-use print collections and not enough time was devoted to high-use electronic formats. We should be under no illusions now how little these are used and the poor return on investment we get with this material in terms of library use." There was also recognition that there would need to be changes in the balance of online and face-to-face provision, particularly in inquiry and support services and teaching and training by library staff. For example, librarians talked about the replacement of some small face-to-face classes, which were very labour-intensive for the small number of students who attended. The fourth question I asked was, what additional services, including online services, do you think will be required in the future? Online services during the pandemic tend to concentrate on the support of teaching and learning, but development was now required in other areas. One that was mentioned was open access through initiatives such as Plan S, to increase the amount of information resources available online. Also, respondents talked about more emphasis on digitisation and digital preservation to make materials such as rare book collections accessible to a wider audience. A number of respondents spoke about the need to transition their research support services online to mirror what had been done for teaching and learning. Other areas for development including publisher services, with the library acting as a publisher. And there was a lot of emphasis in the responses about the need for the library to develop innovative approaches to the support of teaching and learning in an online environment. This included integrating and embedding library content and learning objects such as video tutorials alongside academic talk content in VLEs, innovative linkages between physical library spaces and their online equivalents, developing library websites to develop changing user needs, more online support for students with disabilities, and library involvement in the design and delivery of interactive e-textbook elements in the curriculum. The fifth question I asked was, do you think there will be a move back to some sort of traditional face-to-face services? There were two areas where respondents highlighted a move back to face-to-face provision. One respondent commented that the loss of physical access to study space, especially for groups, had been the biggest challenge for students. Not all students have a suitable study space at home. A lot of the librarians saw a continuing need for face-to-face support at library inquiry desks. In one Australian library, where users were given a choice of online or face-to-face support after a lockdown, the majority of staff and students opted for face-to-face consultations for detailed information support rather than online. For library teaching, respondents recognise that face-to-face could sometimes offer a richer collaborative learning experience that was easier to facilitate. Although respondents tended to recognise that there could be different views from frontline library staff and managers. One manager commented, "Even though I find virtual training sessions to be better from a managerial perspective, in terms of offering a consistent suite of training, reaching a bigger number of attendees and measuring activity, I'm pretty sure that the push from both librarians and students to go back to face-to-face information skills training will be significant." The final question I asked has, have you got any other views on academic library services post-pandemic? There were two areas. First, financial challenges. There were concerns about funding constraints post-pandemic. In most countries, it was felt that public spending is likely to come under increased scrutiny, which with other trends such as international student recruitment being reduced is likely to have a significant impact on staffing and non-staffing budgets. There were also considerable concerns over the cost and licensing of e-content compared with print, and the feeling that there was a need for new approaches and sector-wide collaboration, the current models not being financially sustainable. The second area was collaborative approaches. It was recognised that library collaboration had been very beneficial during the pandemic in the sharing of information, knowledge and experience regionally and nationally. This was in regional academic library consortia and in national collaborative organisations such as SCONAL in the UK. Some conclusions following the survey. There is probably no single simple answer to how permanent the online shift will be in academic libraries. Some institutions and their libraries have a very strong campus ethos, extolling the benefits of an in-person student experience. These institutions will probably look to some dialing back to face-to-face delivery and support. Other institutions have invested heavily in the production of sophisticated online content, and they may look to extend their reach with a greater development of distance delivery and remote learning. Even in campus-based institutions, a growing student preference for digital lectures is likely to continue. This is likely to impact on the nature of the physical estate, including large lecture theatres. There is also likely to be an increased emphasis post-pandemic on student well-being and health. Maybe 24-hour library study facilities and densely packed study areas may well be frowned on in the future. Although it's difficult to predict in detail in terms of what the respondents said, for most academic libraries, there probably will have been a permanent shift in some areas, particularly to enhance e-resource provision, funding permitting, more virtual support, more online library teaching, and online booking arrangements for study space and appointments. However, there is likely to be a need for a more blended approach for areas of activity like study facilities, inquiries and support, and library teaching. Many of the changes to library services I've talked about during the pandemic and for the future involve innovation and the implementation of different technologies. So the second strand of work I'm going to talk about is particularly relevant. I'll give details later, but for a recently published book, I brought together 15 case studies looking at the implementation of different technologies in academic libraries, with a particular emphasis on change management. I also identified a large number of related research papers for an overview chapter. For the concluding chapter of the book, I then carried out a detailed analysis of these case studies and the research papers to identify around 100 key themes and lessons learned by the participants in implementing technology and change projects. I can only give you a flavour of these findings today. To see them all, you obviously need to read the book. But what is clear is that it is important not to let the technology dictate. The technology should be viewed as the enabling agent and not the driver. For projects to be effective, there is a need to fully understand the underlying purpose of the development, particularly the perspective of users and their needs. Implementing new technologies is about change, and it's essential that effective change management processes are implemented. Firstly, a few of the benefits that I identified from technology and change projects. A technology and change project can help raise the visibility, profile status, and reputation of librarians and the library in the university and beyond. A project can also provide an opportunity to lift library staff's gaze from the day-to-day work and engage with a vision of developing services. In collaborative projects, staff are also exposed to a wider pool of ideas, knowledge and expertise from other departments or other institutions. Library staff involved in a successful project can gain confidence and develop a change of mindset with different approaches to work and staff development. There are also positive implications for library staff and their managers. There may be opportunities for the staff to utilise the skills and expertise developed in other projects and with other clients. The case studies and research papers also identified a number of constraints for technology and change projects. In a rapidly changing environment, there is the challenge of which technologies to adopt in a rapidly changing landscape, as well as the cost implications of adopting particular technologies. If the library doesn't participate in particular initiatives in the university, there's also the danger that it may be sidelined in technological developments. Time is the greatest difficulty and risk in technology and change projects. The time can easily be underestimated in terms of building, planning the project, consulting with stakeholders and testing. The time commitment can also be increased if overcomplication takes place. There's also always a danger of overcomplicating the design at a time of rapid technological change. The service system or content may, in fact, have a relatively short shelf life, and it could take a lot of work to review and restructure this. The case study also identified a number of key issues and lessons learned in order to achieve a successful technology and change project. These are mostly concerned with management and softer issues rather than with the technology. Here are some examples. The project should link in appropriate ways to university strategies and programs. It can also be useful to produce a strategic vision for the project, which links explicitly to university and library strategies. Secondly, innovative leadership is often important in technology and change projects. Key aspects include the ability to remove barriers, generate short-term wins, produce a sense of urgency and acceleration, and gain strong commitment from all staff involved. An open and collaborative management style enables the project staff to feel highly valued members of the team, to be consulted and to be able to make contributions. Transparent governance arrangements and effective project management will need to be put in place. Projects with good management processes addressing the people side of change are more likely to be effective. The communication process is also important in change management. There is a need to engage with library staff to understand how they regard the change and to ensure the communication addresses their areas of concern. There is a need to ensure that there is sufficient staff capacity to undertake the project, in particular the changes planned in systems, services and staffing. The changes to staffing levels, roles and responsibilities and organisational structures to operate the new or revised service or system need to be defined. For many projects, success will be dependent on gaining strong support from other staff in the university, in some cases senior university staff. Taking an evidence-based approach involving consultation with an appropriate range of stakeholders helps to ensure that the project is focused on the needs and priorities of users. There may also be a need to engage directly with appropriate library staff early in the project in order to identify and address issues that they may have. The culture in many academic libraries is often deep-seated and can tend to preserve the status quo, making it difficult to implement new innovations that require flexibility and creativity. So to get around this, there is a need to create an environment which encourages risk, innovation and experimentation, and need to balance attitudes to risk against an appetite for change. Even today, there can be a view with some library staff and users that adoption of particular digital technologies goes against the purpose and tradition of libraries. Also, technologies can come embedded with their own set of values and assumptions, with the consequence that the professional values of librarians may be in contact with the values embedded in the technology. An example of this, learning analytics in terms of taking things forward, and user privacy and data protection issues can often be in conflict. Technology development in libraries can provide opportunities for academic librarians to move into new roles beyond their traditional activities, such as management of research outputs, research data management, digital humanities, digital literacy. This can result in librarians moving from a peripheral role to a more central role in teaching and research support. Technology and change projects require a greater emphasis on collaboration of library staff with academic and support staff across the university. Collaborative approaches bring together a wider range of expertise and knowledge and different ways of working. Also, new partnerships between different library teams may also be required. Technology and change projects can help to make academic libraries more user and service-based rather than collection-based. The library service portfolio may also be extended, including engaging beyond traditional user groups. Projects can also have an impact on the nature and extent of library staff workloads, and obviously can help to streamline workflows, automate processes, and rationalize and speed up services. A couple of points about skills, attitudes, and behaviours. For library staff, the presence of skilled and expert staff is an important factor in the success of a project. For library staff involved in technology and change projects, there may be constraints to overcome in terms of staff skills, knowledge, confidence, competency, capability, and capacity. There may also be a need to expand their skills and competencies beyond traditional areas and to adapt to new practices through some targeted staff development and training. Examples might include higher level IT skills, leadership, and negotiation and persuasion skills. The project, in terms of users, the project should be in line with changing user behaviour and expectations. This is particularly true when thinking of younger students who are digital natives, who can have very different needs and preferences in areas such as mobile devices, social media, and learning spaces. So there's a need to analyse and aim to meet the needs of these different stakeholder groups and to understand the differing levels of technology acceptance among different stakeholder groups. 4 final issues that were identified. Firstly, ethical and legal issues. One example will be the needs of disabled students, and accessibility standards and requirements should be addressed when implementing technological developments. There needs to be good integration and interoperability of new or revised systems with relevant existing library and university systems as part of a broader institutional infrastructure. Marketing and promotion strategies relating to these new developments will be required. Promotion needs to aim to increase the knowledge and understanding of the work of the project and encourage use of the service and system. Finally, on evaluation, monitoring and review, interim evaluation is important. A new or revised system needn't be complete before asking for stakeholder feedback. And also at the end of a project, methods such as analytics and metrics, focus groups and surveys should be used to obtain feedback and assess uptake and impact of the new service or system. If you want to find out more about what I've been talking about, the content is included in as I mentioned, 2 recently published books. Firstly, my edited volume, Technology, Change and the Academic Library, Case Studies, Trends and Reflections, was published by Elsevier and Chandos in September last year. This includes an overview and literature review, a chapter on change management, 15 case studies, and my analysis of the benefits, constraints and key issues. Also, a shorter version of my analysis is included in a recent article in the online magazine Elsevier Connect. The second is an edited volume by Professor David Baker and Lucy Ellis, published earlier this year. This includes my chapter and papers around the immediate challenges related to the pandemic, opportunities for new behaviours and the changing role of libraries. Thank you for listening, and I'll be pleased to try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for sharing your very comprehensive research about the current state of especially academic libraries in the recent times. I especially liked your one remark that our services or our focus have become more user and service focused and less focused on the resources. Will you be joining us for the discussion at 11:15 South African time? Yes, apparently he is there. Okay, then I'm not taking questions now. We'll now break for refreshments.